Marcus Coleman had not thought about her in years or so, he told himself. Every single morning, standing in front of the mirror in the narrow bathroom of his apartment, adjusting the collar of a shirt that was clean but unremarkable, the kind of shirt a man wore when he had decided that being noticed was a luxury he could no longer afford. At 38, he had built his life around invisibility, not out of shame, but out of something quieter and more deliberate. A choice made 8 years ago, on a night he had never fully explained to anyone. A choice that had cost him everything he once thought he wanted, and given him, in return, a kind of peace he was not entirely sure he deserved. He arrived at Ashton Dynamics every morning at 7:45, 15 minutes before the official start of the workday. Because punctuality was the one small act of excellence he still permitted himself. He worked in the operations division, managing internal logistics, scheduling maintenance windows, coordinating shift transitions between departments. It was not glamorous work. It did not require an MBA, which he had earned with honors from a program that had once described him as one of the most promising graduates in a decade. It did not require the analytical mind that had once allowed him to draft restructuring proposals that 3 separate Fortune 500 companies had quietly adopted without credit. It required only steadiness, attention to detail, and the ability to disappear into the rhythm of a building's daily life, like water disappearing into sand. Marcus was very good at disappearing. His colleagues liked him without knowing him. They appreciated that he fixed problems before they were reported, that he never raised his voice, that he brought pastries on the last Friday of every month without being asked and without making it a thing. Raymond from the loading dock called him the invisible MVP. Sandra from payroll once told him he was the most reliable person she had ever worked with. He smiled at these things, thanked them, and went back to his desk. He ate lunch alone, usually at his workstation, a container of food he had prepared the night before, while helping his daughter Lily with her homework. Lily was 7 years old and believed, with the absolute conviction of a child who has never been given reason to doubt, that her father was the smartest man in the world. Marcus never corrected her. He figured she had time enough to learn how complicated the world really was. He had never told Lily about Emily Carter. He had never told anyone about Emily Carter. Some things, he had decided, belonged to a version of himself that no longer existed, a younger man who had believed that love was simple, that wanting something was the same as deserving it, that a person could build a future on feeling alone. That man had been wrong, and Marcus had spent 8 years building a quieter, sturdier version of himself in the wreckage of that wrongness. He was not unhappy. He was settled. He was careful. And he had gotten very, very skilled at not thinking about her, except in the early mornings sometimes. When the apartment was quiet and Lily was still asleep and the city had not yet started its noise, he would sit at the kitchen table with his coffee and feel the weight of the thing he did not think about, pressing against the inside of his chest with the particular dull insistence of something that has not gone away, simply because you have stopped looking at it. He had learned, in time, to wait those moments out. They passed. They always passed. He was good at waiting, which was why, when the company-wide email arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, announcing the appointment of Emily Carter as the new Chief Executive Officer of Ashton Dynamics, Marcus Coleman sat at his desk for 43 seconds without moving, without blinking, reading the name on his screen as though it might rearrange itself into something else if he waited long enough. The name sat there in clean black text beneath the company logo, flanked by a brief biographical summary he did not need to read. He already knew it, or rather, he had been carefully not knowing it for years, avoiding the profiles, scrolling past the industry publications, changing the subject when colleagues mentioned her name in the context of the business world's rising stars. He had been diligent about not knowing. He had been methodical, and now her name was on his work computer, in his corporate inbox, in his building, and there was nowhere left to not look. It did not rearrange itself. He closed the email. He opened it again. He closed it. He pulled up the internal HR portal and submitted a request for 5 days of personal leave. Citing a family matter, the request was rejected within the hour by his department supervisor, who sent a brief message explaining that all leave requests were frozen during the executive transition period. Marcus stared at the rejection notification. He considered submitting a sick leave request instead. He considered, for exactly one moment, simply not coming in. Then he folded both options away and went back to his logistics spreadsheet, because Marcus Coleman did not run from things, even when every nerve in his body was screaming at him to do exactly that. He had already run once. He knew what it cost. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning, 9 o'clock, in the main conference hall on the 14th floor. Marcus arrived early and positioned himself near the back, close to the door, in the posture of a man who intends to leave quickly. The hall filled steadily around him, executives in tailored suits, middle managers in business casual, junior staff and everything else, all of them carrying the particular energy of an organization bracing for change, that specific mixture of anxiety and excitement and calculated positioning that a leader... She walked in at 9 on the dot, and the room did what rooms do when someone with real authority enters. It stilled, almost imperceptibly, the way a body of water quiets before a stone breaks its surface. Emily Carter, at 38, was exactly what the profiles and the business press had spent years cataloging: poised, precise, dressed in a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse, her natural hair pulled back with the kind of effortless elegance that suggested she had stopped caring about performing elegance some time ago and had simply become it. She moved to the front of the room with the measured confidence of someone who had stood in front of difficult rooms many times and found them manageable. The senior executives near the front adjusted their postures almost unconsciously. Someone stopped their side conversation mid-sentence. A junior analyst near Marcus shifted her weight from one foot to the other and then went very still, the way young people do when they have decided, in that particular instant, what they want to eventually become. Marcus had been watching her for exactly 2 seconds. When she turned and her eyes moved across the room in a quick, professional survey, and then stopped, found him, held. It lasted less than 3 seconds. Then she looked away, and Marcus exhaled a breath he had been holding. He realized, for the better part of a decade, across the room, Emily Carter smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from the front of her blazer, squared her shoulders, and began to speak. Her voice was the same, deeper maybe, more assured, but the same. He did not hear a single word of her opening remarks. He was too busy reminding himself to breathe. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Emily outlined her vision with the clean efficiency of someone who had prepared extensively and respected other people's time. She spoke about accountability, about operational excellence, about the need to surface talent that had been overlooked or underutilized. Several people around Marcus nodded with the enthusiasm of employees who are not sure yet whether to believe what they are hearing but very much want to. Marcus stood at the back and watched her the way a man watches a storm he knows is coming toward him, unable to move, unable to look away. When the meeting ended, people filed out in clusters, already forming opinions, already recalibrating their positions. Marcus moved toward the door with deliberate casualness, close enough to the edge of the crowd to be unremarkable. He was almost through when he heard, behind him, the voice of the head of human resources saying, "Miss Carter, shall I send you the full personnel files before end of day?" "Please," Emily said, "and I'd like the operations division first." Marcus kept walking. The personnel review took 2 days. Marcus spent those 2 days doing his work with the particular concentration of a man trying very hard not to think about something. He was efficient. He was thorough. He fixed a recurring scheduling conflict between the night maintenance crew and the HVAC technicians that had been generating complaint tickets for 6 months. He rewrote a vendor communication template that had been causing delays in procurement. He ate his lunch at his desk and went home at 5:30 and helped Lily with a project about the water cycle and did not check his work email after 7. He slept badly both nights. On Friday afternoon, he was called into the executive suite. The room was different than it had been under the previous CEO cleaner. More spare. The clutter of the old regime replaced with a deliberate simplicity that felt like a statement. Emily stood at the head of the conference table with 2 HR representatives and the outgoing operations director. She did not look at Marcus when he entered. She was reviewing something on her tablet with the focused attention of a person who has trained herself to deal with one thing at a time. "Thank you for coming, Marcus," said the HR director, a woman named Carol, who had always been kind to him. "Miss Carter has been reviewing personnel files and has some questions about the operations team's structure." Marcus nodded. He sat when he was invited to sit. He kept his expression neutral, which he had become very good at. Emily looked up from her tablet. Their eyes met, and for a fraction of a second, something passed between them that had no name and no place in a corporate conference room. A recognition so old and so involuntary, it preceded language. And then Emily set the tablet face down on the table and folded her hands. "I've reviewed your file extensively," she said. Her voice was measured, professional. "Your work output is consistently in the top 3% of this division. You've solved operational problems that your supervisors didn't know existed. Your coworkers trust you. Your attendance record is perfect." She paused. "You've also declined 3 separate promotions in the past 4 years." The room was very quiet. Marcus said, "I was satisfied with my current role." "I see." Emily studied him for a moment, with an expression he could not read. "I'm restructuring the executive support function. I'll need a chief of staff who understands this company's internal operations at a granular level." She looked at him steadily. "Effective Monday, you'll be serving as my direct assistant with a view toward a formal chief of staff appointment pending a 60-day evaluation." The silence in the room was absolute. Carol, from HR, blinked. The operations director opened his mouth and closed it again. Marcus felt the words land one by one, like stones dropped into still water, each one sending out ripples he could not stop. "I don't think that's an appropriate fit," he said carefully. "The decision has been made," Emily said, in the same tone she might use to announce a quarterly earnings target. "Flat, final. Not unkind, but immovable. You'll receive the formal documentation this afternoon. HR will coordinate the transition." She picked up her tablet again. "That will be all." Marcus rode the elevator back to the 4th floor and stood at his desk for a long moment, looking at the logistics spreadsheet still open on his screen, the one he had been working on for the past 2 days, with the focused desperation of a man trying to outrun something. Then he sat down, closed the spreadsheet, and stared at the wall. He did not understand what she was doing. He did not know if she was punishing him or offering him something, or simply, in the ruthlessly practical way she had always operated, identifying an asset and deploying it. What he knew was that he had spent 8 years building a careful distance between himself and this woman, and she had dissolved it in 45 minutes without raising her voice. The Monday that followed was the longest day Marcus had worked in years. He reported to the executive suite at 7:30 and was handed a briefing packet by Emily's outgoing executive assistant, a young man named Derek, who looked faintly relieved to be transitioning to a different department and spent the first hour trying to learn the shape of a new role, while simultaneously managing the logistical vertigo of sitting at a desk 30 feet from a woman he had once loved so completely that leaving her had required him to leave everything else as well. Emily arrived at 8. She acknowledged him with a nod. The same nod she gave Derek. The same nod she gave the security guard at the lobby, efficient and impersonal, and went directly to her office. The door stayed open, which he eventually understood was intentional. She wanted to be accessible. She wanted to be seen working. She was sending a message to the entire executive floor. And Marcus was, apparently, part of that message. The work itself was not difficult. It was, in fact, exactly the kind of work Marcus was built for: synthesizing information, anticipating needs, managing the logistical architecture of a very busy person's professional life. He drafted briefing summaries. He coordinated with department heads. He flagged a conflict in Emily's calendar between a board call and a client presentation that would have been a problem on Thursday if he hadn't caught it on Monday. Emily, reviewing his work late in the afternoon, paused at that last item and said, without looking up, "Good catch." Just those 2 words. Marcus thanked her in the same tone she had used, professional and clipped, and went back to his desk. The days that followed arranged themselves into a pattern that was, on the surface, entirely ordinary. Emily and Marcus occupied adjacent professional worlds, coordinating smoothly, communicating clearly, maintaining at all times a distance that was not cold exactly, but was definitely deliberate, like two people walking parallel paths that kept nearly touching without quite meeting. They traveled together to a client meeting in Boston, sitting in adjacent seats on the train with their respective work open on their laptops, and very little said between them that was not directly relevant to the client. Marcus noted, during that train ride, that she still held her coffee cup with both hands when she was thinking a habit she had had at 29 that she apparently still had at 38, small and specific and so familiar, it hit him like a physical thing. He looked away. He focused on his laptop. He was very professional about it. They ate lunch together twice, in the executive dining room, surrounded by other people, speaking in the careful shorthand of two professionals who have quickly become fluent in each other's working rhythms. They stayed late on a Thursday to finish a board presentation, the office emptying around them until they were the last two people on the floor. And at one point, at around 10 in the evening, Emily set down her pen and rubbed her eyes, and for just a moment the armor dropped. She looked tired and human, and exactly like herself before she picked the pen back up and kept working. Marcus kept his eyes on his own screen and said nothing. But he felt it, the way you feel a shift in air pressure in the muscles of your chest. What he had not prepared for was how much she still made sense to him, the way her mind worked, the speed of it, the quality of its attention, the way she could hold 6 competing priorities in clear parallel and make decisions about them without visible effort. He recognized all of it. He had spent 8 years trying to convince himself that what they had been to each other was a thing of youth, of inexperience, of a time before he understood himself or the world well enough to make anything real. And then she was right there. Every day, and she was real. And she was making it very difficult for him to maintain the fiction that he had moved on. The competence of her was almost unbearable in its familiarity. The way she listened when she was genuinely considering something, that particular stillness, the slight angle of her head, the moment before she spoke when she had already decided but was still organizing the words he had cataloged all of it once, years ago. The way you catalog the things you love, without knowing you were doing it, simply because they are worth remembering. He remembered them now. He remembered them every day, and he went home every evening and helped Lily with her homework and made dinner and told himself, firmly and without particular conviction, that this was enough. What neither of them said, what neither of them acknowledged in any direct way, was the weight of what sat between them, the 8 years of silence, the absence of explanation, the clean disappearance he had performed with such devastating thoroughness that she had had no way to follow it, even if she had wanted to. The watch surfaced on a Tuesday afternoon in the 4th week. Marcus had reached across her desk to retrieve a document, and his sleeve had ridden up, and the old watch had caught the light, a simple piece, silver-toned, with a slightly worn band, and a face that had a small scratch on the crystal that hadn't been there when it was new. Emily's hand froze over the document she was signing. Her eyes went to the watch, stayed there. It was the watch she had given him on his birthday, the last birthday they had shared, the one where she had sat across from him at a small restaurant that smelled of garlic and bread and candlelight, and told him that she wanted to spend every birthday after this one in exactly the same way with him, at a table, with food between them and nowhere else to be. She had said it so plainly and so certainly, the way she said things when she was completely sure of them, and he had believed her. He had believed her completely. Marcus pulled his sleeve down and straightened, and Emily looked back at her document, and neither of them spoke. But something had changed in the air of the room, a slight quickening, a rearrangement of the atmosphere, the way a room changes when a window is opened somewhere and the stillness breaks. That evening, Marcus was getting coffee from the small kitchen at the end of the executive hall, when he heard voices in the corridor, Emily's assistant Carol from HR, talking to someone he didn't recognize. He caught only fragments, not out of eavesdropping but because the corridor was quiet, and voices carry when walls are made of glass. A man's name he didn't know. The words left the program. And then, clearly, sold everything he had, just walked away. The voices moved off. Marcus stood with his coffee and knew, with the certainty of someone who has lived the story being described, exactly what they had been talking about. Someone had been digging. He was not surprised. Emily Carter was thorough. It was one of the things he had always admired about her. Even now, even when the thoroughness was being applied to him, the crisis arrived in the 6th week, as crises tend to do without adequate warning and at the worst possible moment. A major client integration project, one that represented close to 18% of Ashton Dynamics' annual revenue, hit a structural failure late on a Wednesday evening when a data migration protocol collapsed and took 3 weeks of work with it. The project lead called Marcus in a panic at 9:15. Marcus assessed the situation in 12 minutes, contacted 2 specific members of the technical team whose work he had been quietly cataloging for months, and by midnight had a recovery framework that the project lead presented to the client the following morning as a disaster mitigation plan. The client did not withdraw. The project survived. 3 people received formal commendations. Marcus's name was not among them because he had kept himself out of the chain of attribution, as he had always done. Emily found out anyway. She called him into her office on Friday afternoon and looked at him across her desk with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite something else, something that lived between those things. "You solved it," she said. It was not a question. "The team solved it," Marcus said. "Marcus." She said his name in a particular way, quiet and direct, that was entirely different from the professional register she had maintained for 6 weeks. He felt it land. He held very still. "I know what you did," she said. "I know how you did it. I've been watching you for 6 weeks. And I know exactly how good you are." She paused. "What I don't know is why you've been spending 8 years pretending you're not." The room was quiet. Outside, the city was doing its city things, cars and distance, and the particular hum of a Friday evening beginning. Inside, it was just the 2 of them and 8 years, and a question he had been successfully avoiding since March. He told her finally. Not all of it. Not the whole length and texture of it. But the essential thing. That he had believed, on the night he left, that she had chosen her career over them, that her family had been pressuring her to end the relationship, that he had seen an email misread, he understood now, misread catastrophically, that had seemed to confirm what he had feared for months, which was that he was a complication in her life rather than a presence, that he had left the way he had because staying and being asked to leave seemed, in the particular darkness of that night, like something he could not survive, that he had told himself he was giving her a clean break, that he had believed, genuinely, that she would be relieved. Emily listened without moving. When he finished, the silence lasted long enough that he could hear his own heartbeat. Then she pressed her fingers to her eyes, and her breath came out in a long, unsteady exhale. And when she lowered her hands, her eyes were bright. "I never chose anything over you," she said. "I never asked you to leave. I never." Her voice caught. She stopped, started again. "I spent 2 years trying to find out what happened to you. I thought something had happened to you." Marcus looked at her across the desk. 8 years of careful, constructed distance felt, in that moment, like a single thin wall between 2 rooms that had always been connected. "I'm sorry," he said. It was not enough. He knew it was not enough. He said it anyway, because it was true. Because he had been carrying it for 8 years. Because some things need to be said out loud even when they arrive far too late. She nodded. She looked out the window. Then she straightened, and the armor came back partial, this time with visible seams, and she said, "We have the quarterly review on Monday," and Marcus said, "I'll have the briefing ready," and they both went back to work, because that was what they both knew how to do. What neither of them could have anticipated, in that quiet Friday office, was that someone else had been paying attention. Victor Harlan, the executive vice president of corporate development, was 61 years old, ambitious in the way of men who have wanted something for a very long time and watched other people get it instead, and he had decided, in the first week of Emily's tenure, that she represented a problem. He had expected to be appointed CEO. He had positioned himself for it, carefully, over 3 years cultivating board relationships, managing optics, ensuring that his name was consistently adjacent to the company's successes and reliably distant from its failures. He had done everything right, by his own accounting, and the result had been a woman he had never met, arriving from outside the organization with a better resume and a cleaner track record, and sitting in the chair he had decided was his. Victor Harlan had absorbed this with the surface equanimity of a professional, and had spent the month since, quietly, methodically, looking for the thing that would change the equation. He was patient. In the way of men who have learned that the best weapons are the ones nobody sees being assembled, he had been watching Marcus and Emily for weeks with the particular attention of someone collecting ammunition, and what he collected he shaped into a weapon. He began quietly, selectively, with the kind of careful insinuation that is difficult to trace a word here, a raised eyebrow there, a comment to a board member about the unusual nature of Emily's relationship with her assistant, about the question of whether personal history might be clouding professional judgment. The board, already uncertain about the new CEO's directives, received these seeds with varying degrees of receptiveness, but they grew in the way seeds do when the soil is anxious. The formal complaint arrived on a Monday, an anonymous submission to the board's ethics review process, alleging improper preferential treatment and a personal conflict of interest in Emily's appointment of Marcus. The board convened an inquiry. Marcus, who had been tracking the political currents of the building with the instincts of someone who has learned to read environments as a survival skill, understood what was happening within 24 hours. He spent a full day considering his options with the same methodical care he brought to every problem he encountered. And at the end of that day he arrived at the conclusion he had known he would arrive at from the beginning, that the simplest solution was the one that removed the variable. He went to Emily's office, closed the door, and placed his resignation letter on her desk. He had written it carefully, without drama, 2 paragraphs, clean and professional, citing the need to avoid any appearance of impropriety and expressing genuine gratitude for the opportunity. It was, he thought, the right thing to do. He had spent a great portion of his adult life doing things he believed to be right for other people and paying the personal cost of them without complaint. This felt familiar. This felt, in a way he did not entirely examine, like something he knew how to do. This ends it, he said. If I'm not here, there's nothing to investigate. Emily looked at the letter. Then she looked at him. There was something in her expression he had not seen before, not the controlled composure of the boardroom, not the exhausted humanity of the late-night office, but something that was alive and absolutely certain of itself. She pushed the letter back across the desk without touching it. No, she said. Emily, no. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room completely. You have spent 8 years making yourself small because you thought it was the right thing to do for someone you loved. I am not going to let you do that again, not for me. Not because some bitter man with a political agenda decided to make you a target. She stood up. Go back to your desk. Do your work. Let me handle this. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the letter and put it in his pocket and went back to his desk. Emily handled it. She spent 9 days quietly and thoroughly dismantling Victor Harlan's constructed narrative. She obtained internal communication records through legitimate legal channels. She identified the pattern of selective information he had provided to board members, the careful omissions that had shaped a misleading picture, and the existence of a falsified internal memo bearing Marcus's name, a document Victor's assistant had prepared using a template that could be traced, with sufficient forensic patience, back to Victor's own computer. She brought in an external auditor. She documented everything. She built a case with the same methodical precision she applied to everything she built, and when she was done, she presented it to the full board in a 3-hour session that she conducted without raising her voice once. Marcus was cleared. Victor Harlan's resignation was requested and received the same afternoon. 3 board members who had amplified his claims without verification issued formal apologies. Emily returned to her office at 7 in the evening, sat at her desk, and allowed herself, alone, in the quiet, to shake for approximately 3 minutes. It was not the kind of shaking that comes from fear. She had not been afraid. Not exactly, not even when the outcome was uncertain, but the kind that arrives after sustained intensity releases its grip. When the body finally permits itself to acknowledge what it has been holding. She had worked very hard, and very carefully, for 9 days. And she had done it because it was right, and because the alternative was unthinkable. And now it was done. And she let herself feel the weight of it for exactly 3 minutes before she stood up, washed her face in the small bathroom attached to the office, and went home. She did not permit herself to feel the other thing she was feeling, something warmer and more complicated than professional satisfaction, something that had Marcus's name on it, until she was in the elevator going down, and then she felt it fully and completely, and without apology. And she let it stay. She did not tell Marcus any of this. He found out, as he found out most things, by paying attention from fragments of corridor conversation, from Carol and HR, from the particular quality of the silence that followed Victor Harlan's departure. He sat with it for 2 days and said nothing. On a Wednesday evening, 3 days after the board presentation, Marcus arrived at Emily's office at 6 o'clock to find her staring at a budget projection with the glazed attention of someone whose mind is somewhere else entirely. He set a cup of coffee on her desk, and she looked up, and he said, "Thank you, just that." She looked at him for a moment, and then said, "Don't thank me. I was doing my job." And Marcus said, "I know. Thank you anyway." And something shifted between them, not dramatically, not with any single definitive gesture, but in the way things shift when two people have finally stopped pretending. A small, essential movement toward honesty. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday evening in late October, Marcus went to Emily's office after the building had emptied to collect a tablet she had forgotten, and found her standing at the window, looking out at the city at night. She heard him come in and didn't turn around. He set the tablet on the desk. He was about to leave when she said, quietly, "I never replaced it." He stopped. "The chair," she said, "in the apartment I had when we were together. After you left, I sat in it for 3 months, trying to understand what I'd done. I never figured it out." She paused. "Now I know I hadn't done anything." He crossed the room and stood beside her at the window, and they looked at the city together in silence. And Marcus said, "I know." He said, "I was afraid, not of you, of being the reason things got harder for you, of being something that cost you something you'd worked for." He paused. "I was wrong." She said, "You were." He said, "I know." And then, because neither of them had ever been particularly good at leaving things unfinished, she turned from the window and he was right there, and the distance between them was the same distance. It had always been small enough to close, large enough to require a choice. They talked until 2 in the morning. Not about the office, not about the past month of strategy and crisis, and carefully maintained professionalism, about everything else, about Lily, who Marcus described with a quiet pride that made Emily smile in a way that rearranged something in her face she had not expected. A daughter. She realized, had not factored it into whatever incomplete picture of Marcus's 8 years she had been carrying, and the existence of this small human who believed her father was the smartest man in the world, did something complicated and warm to her chest. About the scholarship he had turned down, which Emily listened to with an expression of someone filing away something important, something she intended to return to and examine more carefully when she was alone. About the years in between the moves, the cities, the reasons he had stayed small, the ways he had told himself that small was enough, and the particular tiredness that had accumulated in him from the sustained effort of containing what he was actually capable of. About what she had done in those 8 years, the career she had built, the things she had achieved, the city after city and title after title, the way she had told herself that building something larger than herself was enough to fill the space where something small and personal and irreplaceable used to live. About what it had cost both of them to be careful with the wrong things, to protect themselves against the right ones, to mistake caution for wisdom and distance for strength. At some point past midnight, Emily said, "I never stopped." Marcus looked at her. "Caring," she said, "about you. I tried. I got very good at everything else." She looked at her hands. "But I never stopped." Marcus was quiet for a long time. The city hummed distantly outside. A cleaning crew moved somewhere below them in the building, the sound of it rising faintly through the floor. He said, "Neither did I." He said it plainly, without decoration, in the way of someone who has been carrying a true thing for a long time and is finally putting it down. She looked at him. He looked back, and they did not kiss, not that night that came later, in its own time, in the slower, more careful way of people who have learned something about the cost of being reckless with what matters. What happened that night was simpler and more essential. They stopped pretending. They let the real thing, the thing that had always been there, under all the professional courtesy and careful management and elaborately constructed distance, breathe. Emily reached out and took his hand. Not romantically, not definitively, just a hand in a hand, in the middle of the night, in a quiet office, after a very long several months. Marcus held it. Outside, the city went on doing what cities do, indifferent and continuous. Inside, something that had been held apart for 8 years, finally, quietly, came back together. The year that followed moved the way good years do not in dramatic leaps, but in the accumulation of ordinary days. Each one, a small deposit into something that was being built more carefully and more durably than either of them had managed the first time. Marcus's role evolved formally. In January, Emily presented to the board a restructured executive team that included a new position, Director of Strategic Operations. The board, still in the recalibration phase following the previous autumn's events, approved without significant resistance. Marcus took the role without the fanfare he had been declining for years, and found, somewhat to his surprise, that being visible did not feel like the threat he had spent so long treating it as. He was good at the work, publicly and undeniably. And allowing himself to be seen being good at it turned out to be something he could live with. There was an adjustment period a few weeks during which he felt the strange, mild vertigo of someone who has been standing very still for a long time and has suddenly started walking, and then the vertigo passed and the work remained. And the work was good, and he let himself occupy it fully, without the old habit of dimming himself to fit the space. The people who had catalogued him as a quiet, unremarkable fixture of the operations floor recalibrated in stages. Some did it gracefully, others did it awkwardly, with the particular discomfort of people who have been wrong about something they were certain of. A few never did it at all, which Marcus found he was able to accommodate without bitterness, because he had not built his sense of himself on their opinions for a long time. Emily remained exactly who she was exacting, strategic, capable of a sharpness that could clarify a room the way a cold front clarifies the air. But the people who worked closest with her noticed, over the course of that year, that something in her had eased. She smiled more, at actual things. She stayed for the end-of-year team dinner, instead of leaving after 30 minutes. She brought Lily to the office one Saturday afternoon in April, when Marcus had to come in for a few hours, and Lily sat at a conference table with a juice box and a coloring book and told Emily, with the serene authority of a 7-year-old, that her office was very neat, which is good because my dad always says messy desks mean messy thinking. Emily had laughed a real laugh, the kind that arrived before composure could organize itself, and Marcus, watching from across the room, felt something complete inside him like a compass finding north. They were careful about the professional optics, as careful people tend to be, and they were deliberate about how they managed the intersection of their personal and professional lives. There was a board disclosure. There were conversations with HR. There were structures put in place that ensured Marcus's work was evaluated independently and transparently. They did these things without drama and without apology, because both of them understood that the way you manage the real things in your life is by being organized and honest about them, not by pretending they don't exist. By autumn, they were known to be together, quietly and definitely. and the company had largely absorbed this information and moved on to other things to discuss, the way organizations always do when the novelty of something fades. Marcus's work spoke for itself. Emily's leadership had, over the course of the year, produced measurable results that were difficult to argue with. The story of their history, the years apart, the misread message, the loss that had turned out to be a recoverable one, existed in the background of everything. Known to those who knew, private for those who didn't, Marcus had stopped bracing for the moment someone would use it against them. And in stopping, had discovered that the moment never came. The world, it turned out, is less interested in the mechanisms of other people's happiness than the anxious part of a person tends to assume. People saw two competent professionals doing good work and living their lives, and that was sufficient. Marcus found this realization unexpectedly freeing, as though he had been holding tension in his body for years without knowing it, and had only noticed it was gone once it was. The annual gala was held in December, in a hotel ballroom that Ashton Dynamics had used for this event for 15 consecutive years, a space large enough for the full staff and their guests, decorated with the tasteful restraint of a company that had learned, over time, to celebrate itself without showing off. Marcus stood near the edge of the room in the early part of the evening, talking to Raymond from the loading dock, who had come with his wife and was wearing a tie he had clearly not worn in some time, and who told Marcus with great satisfaction that he had always known there was more to him than met the eye. Marcus thanked him and meant it. Emily took the stage at 8 o'clock for the traditional executive address. She was, as she always was in formal settings, precise and warm in equal measure, expressing genuine appreciation, acknowledging the year's challenges with directness, articulating the next year's direction with the kind of clarity that made people feel oriented rather than managed. Then, near the end of her remarks, she departed slightly from the prepared text. "There were things I got right this year," she said, "and things I got wrong. And a few things I got right for reasons some people found confusing." She paused, and there was a small ripple of laughter in the room, because a year had passed, and the story of Marcus Coleman's appointment as her assistant had become one of those organizational myths that a company retells until it becomes part of its own history. Someone once suggested to me that my judgment in that decision was compromised by emotion. She looked out at the room steadily. What I actually did was look at a personnel file and recognize the best operational mind in this building. I made the decision any competent CEO should make. She paused. The rest of it, she said, was its own thing entirely. There was real laughter now, and real warmth in it, the laughter of people who have watched a story unfold from the inside and know how it ended. Marcus, standing near the center of the room, was looking at her with the expression of a man who has no more distance left to maintain. He walked to the stage as she stepped down from the podium, and the room quieted in that particular way it does when people sense that something is happening, not a performance, not a speech, but something real and unscripted, and therefore worth watching. He had the ring in his jacket pocket, where it had been for considerably longer than this evening. It was a simple thing, silver-toned, not showy, the ring of a person who had spent 8 years learning the difference between the things that last and the things that only seem to. He had bought it 2 months ago on a Saturday morning while Lily was at a birthday party, standing in a small jeweler's near his apartment, with no particular occasion in mind, and the quiet certainty of someone who has finally stopped waiting for permission to want what he wants. The right moment, he had come to understand, was not a thing that arrived on its own schedule. It was a thing you made, with what you had, in whatever room you happened to be standing in, when you were finally ready. Emily saw him coming and stopped. Something moved across her face, not surprise exactly, but the expression of someone recognizing the shape of something they have been waiting for without knowing they were waiting. 8 years, Marcus said. He said it quietly. So it was really only for her, though the room was hushed enough that the words existed in it. I spent 8 years getting this wrong. I don't want to spend any more time getting it wrong. He held up the ring. I know what I want. I've known for longer than I'm proud of. If you're willing to try this the right way, he stopped. Started again. Emily, will you marry me? She looked at him, and her eyes were bright, and she was absolutely still for a long moment. And then she said, yes, just that. One word. The way she said everything that mattered, clean and sure, and without hedging. The room exhaled. Someone near the back started clapping, and then the whole room was clapping. And Raymond, from the loading dock, was saying something enthusiastic to his wife, and Carol from HR was pressing her hand over her mouth in the way of someone fighting tears in a professional setting. Marcus slid the ring onto Emily's finger, and she looked at it. And then she looked at him, and whatever she had been holding, the years of it, the loss of it, the careful reconstruction of a life organized around its absence, she let go of it completely. It left her face like weather clearing. They walked out of the ballroom together a little while later, not as CEO and director, not as the axis of a year's worth of organizational drama, not as former lovers or current colleagues, or any of the specific categories into which the world had tried to sort them. They walked out as two people who had lost something real and genuine a long time ago, and had spent years living in the shape of its absence, and had found their way improbably, stubbornly, by the particular grace of proximity and honesty and the refusal, in the end, to keep running back to each other. The city was cold and bright outside the hotel. Emily leaned into Marcus's shoulder, and he put his arm around her, and they stood there for a moment before the car arrived, just standing in the cold, in the light, in the uncomplicated fact of being exactly where they were supposed to be. He had spent 8 years making himself small and calling it peace. She had spent 8 years making herself everything and calling it enough. Neither of those things had been true. What was true was this: the night air and her warmth beside him, and the ring on her finger, and the knowledge settled and clear, and nothing like the terrified certainty of the young man who had run away that the right choice, made in time, is still a choice that can hold. Lily, when Marcus told her the following morning over breakfast, put down her spoon and looked at him with those serious 7-year-old eyes and said, "Is she nice?" Marcus told her yes. Lily considered this. Does she like coloring books? Marcus smiled. I think she's open to it, he said. Lily nodded, solemnly, and went back to her cereal, and Marcus sat at his kitchen table in the morning light and felt for the first time in a very long time, in the uncomplicated, undefended way of someone who has finally stopped bracing for the loss of good things, happy.